President Masatsugu Asakawa, Minister Sri Mulyani Indravati, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me immense pleasure to address the Southeast Asia Development Symposium organized by ADB. I'm glad to speak with all of you in Bali, where in 2022, India was handed over the baton of G20 presidency from Indonesia, witnessed by leaders of both the countries who share a great passion for driving transformation across the world. The Indonesian presidency placed great emphasis and focus on solving the global devastation brought by the COVID-19 pandemic and other challenges, including climate change, which has caused economic downturn, increased poverty, slowed global recovery, and hindered the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. Ladies and gentlemen, taking forward the discussion to India, we're building upon some of the successes of the Indonesian presidency, which placed great emphasis on transition towards low-carbon economy at the forefront of the agenda. Given the multifaceted nature of climate change and its cross-cutting nature across sectors, the Indian G20 presidency has laid down its presidency such that the global climate needs are addressed across all the thematic areas at the G20. Ladies and gentlemen, the priorities of the presidency in India focus very strongly on climate action, climate finance, on lifestyle for sustainability, and also on accelerating progress on sustainable development goals. India is the first G20 presidency to focus on the interlinkages between various sectors such as climate and health. With support from the Asian Development Bank, we are working to build consensus on principles which can reduce carbon footprints of health systems, decarbonize health supply chains, mobilize finance for issues at the nexus of climate and health. Ladies and gentlemen, the recent IPCC synthesis report of the 6th assessment report is a devastating news for all, but also indicates that we are not out of options to address climate change. Of the available carbon space in the 1.5 degrees centigrade scenario, developed countries of today account for the bulk of emissions. G20 countries are responsible for 75 to 80% of the current annual greenhouse gas emissions, and thus will play a key role in global emission reduction targets. Countries need to aim to achieve decarbonized industrialization, and this creates a great opportunities for countries of both South and Southeast Asia and of Asia. Achieving net zero emissions is essential to address the global climate crisis and limit the impacts of climate change, which have a negative impact on the ecosystem we live in, hamper energy security balance, lead to serious health issues, and have macroeconomic implications by pushing vulnerable countries into more debt. As more and more people move from rural to urban areas in developing countries, the demand and emissions from transportation sector also set to significantly rise. And therefore, ladies and gentlemen, it is very important that on a global landscape, there is a need to balance mitigation and adaptation measures. Technological transfer along with finance will play a critical role in achieving global and domestic net zero ambitions. India sits at a unique leadership position to drive climate-oriented outcomes, where we are the only G20 country in the top 10 rankings of the Climate Change Performance Index. Despite being home to about 17% of the global population, India's per capita emissions are 1.96 tons, less than a third of the world's average greenhouse gas emissions. India has used only 1.3% of the total carbon space, in contrast to 17.5%, which would be the total carbon space available for India upon equitable division of carbon space across nations on a per capita income basis. We are, however, committed to be the leading nation to drive decarbonization and be the first nation in the world to industrialize without carbonizing ourselves. Building upon India's abundant renewable energy potential, we aim to emulate our success with solarization, where we went from building world's largest solar farm to leading International Solar Alliance. In other areas such as green hydrogen, which will make India a global hub for the production and export of green hydrogen. India has achieved and showcased a remarkable achievement by achieving its first NDC 9 years ahead of schedule, whereby 40% of electric installed capacity came from renewable sources in 2021 against a target of 2030. Prime Minister Modi's Lifestyle for Environment, LIFE, which now works with the United Nations to encapsulate the concepts of circularity, nudge theory, and technology transformation for driving macro, individual, and community actions for combating climate change. And ladies and gentlemen, life is necessary because individuals' behavior must change. Going at this pace, we would be the first country in the world to industrialize without the need to carbonize, as I said. Financing for net zero emissions is critical to drive investments, and financial mechanisms need to support the transitions to a net zero economy. However, the size of the task is huge, the need for action is immediate, and the consequences of failure would be catastrophic. Time-bound energy transition is contingent upon the availability and alignment of low-cost international finance for advancing critical new technologies. Transition will require a significant investment of over $200 trillion in new and low-carbon infrastructure, technologies and solutions across sectors such as heavy industries, transport, and health. Meeting this massive financial gap requires an amalgamation of public and private finance through various financing mechanisms. There is no shortage of finance, ladies and gentlemen. The challenge before all of us is to de-risk projects and ensure that we are able to get long-term finance from private resources. We are able to bring in new instruments of blended finance, of credit enhancements, of first loss guarantees. Private finance possesses the potential to plug the financing gap for net zero targets, and the presidency of India aims to strengthen and deploy mechanisms such as this: blending finance, credit enhancement measures such as guarantees, debt for climate swaps, climate policy performance bonds, green bonds, impact investment, and carbon pricing frameworks. India's G20 presidency will continue to collaboratively work with organizations and countries in Southeast Asia, learn from their experiences, work in partnership with them to combat climate change and achieve the net zero targets. The cornerstone of all our efforts must be the need to move away from a status quoist approach. We need to usher disruptive transformation that can help us usher the global South towards green, innovative, and responsible growth. Beyond framing of guidelines and the policies for green finance to create an appropriate incentive and restrictive mechanism, green elements should be incorporated into countries' laws and regulations, including fiscal, taxation, monetary, credit, and industrial policies. Focus on facilitating transition from linear to circular economy models in key areas such as strategic and critical minerals, e-waste is fundamental for climate action. Adoption of circular economic models will also be central to green economies of the future. We must move from take, make, and dispose to reduce, reuse, and recycle. One nation cannot single-handedly scale up efforts against tackling climate change. We in India have created meaningful partnerships with Southeast Asia to drive coordinated scale-up of clean technologies. We'll continue to work with them. Surrounded by Southeast Asian countries, we are most vulnerable to climate change. It is of paramount importance that we work with Southeast Asian countries and collaborate with them to tackle climate change and its effect. It is critical that Southeast Asian governments, communities, and private sector entities contribute to achieving carbon neutrality by adopting technological solutions, accelerating availability of low-cost finance, and deploying other measures collaboratively. The G20 presidency of India will continue to work with our colleagues from Southeast Asia government, with Asian Development Bank, and organizations to synergize our efforts and ambitions for a green, inclusive, and resilient future. I sincerely hope to build partnerships that go a long way in helping countries of our regions tackle socio-economic priorities and climate ambitions collaboratively. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I'm truly delighted to be speaking to all of you. Thank you very much.